Oh, there's a lot of songs I could have opened this with. Here we go again. You spin me round. Oh well, anything about going in a circle would have worked. Loop Hero! So this is a game that at time of recording, it was actually a little while ago, that I wrapped up playing on Twitch. Consider following me on Twitch. I stream Wednesdays and Fridays, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. But in any case, this was a really interesting game that I found myself getting very wrapped up in while I was playing it. I'm not sure it's a game that I would feel a need to replay because the nature of it kind of is a replay as you go through it. So like the idea of going back to it from scratch like has almost no appeal to me, but I definitely enjoyed it while I was playing it. So this is, I would say, an 8-bit style, visual style. And I emphasize 8-bit over 16-bit because this has a color palette and a level of pixelation more akin to your original Nintendo versus, say, your Super Nintendo or your Genesis. But so that's the look, and the soundscape is kind of in that area as well. It is, boy, it's kind of a difficult game to try to explain. It is technically post-apocalyptic because it is set after the world is basically everything except you is pretty much gone. And you just find yourself on this looping path. And as you walk through it, some things will crop up. Initially, like little slimes, little enemies that you can defeat. And then you get cards. So there's a little bit of a deck building element to it. Not too much, though, and I will come back to that. But you get cards of certain things that you can place down either directly on the path or on the map overall. And they are things that will impact what develops. So certain kinds of tiles will bring about certain enemies. And you do want enemies because you get resources and experience from defeating them. There are other tiles that will simply directly impact you as a character, might make you faster, gain experience more, increase your hit points, things of that nature. So you go through and you build up these cards and you place them, and every time you place them, it shifts the landscape and what is going on and what can happen. And also, every time you complete a loop, the enemies get tougher. So even as you go up in experience, they are also going to get harder. And eventually you will get to a point where you will have to make the decision, because every time you come back to the start point, which is the campsite, you can retreat and you can keep all the resources you've gathered, because amongst other things like equipment and cards to lay down on the thing, you are gathering resources that can be used to effectively build up your home base, which also impacts long-term gameplay. And those are permanent changes, as opposed to what you place on the loop itself, which resets completely every single time you start a new, they're called expeditions. And so there's a risk-reward thing going on where you'll finish a loop and you think, can I make it around one more time to get even more resources? Is it worth me trying? Because if you die, you don't lose all your resources. You still get some back so that it never feels like a total loss, even if you die on the loop. But you will be able to retreat with everything at the campsite. But once you're off the campsite, you need to make it back again, or else you're going to lose a big chunk of what you earned. So there's that risk-reward factor to it. The narrative is a little loose, but it's about what you'd expect given this sort of setup, which is you, in building up your sort of home base, your campsite, and also in the effort of working and filling out the map on every loop that you take, you are trying to rebuild the world. That's the actual narrative of the game. And the enemies and the bosses, especially the bosses that you fight later on, they are trying to prevent you from doing that. And if you're wondering why they would prevent that, that's actually kind of almost bonus material. Because after you beat the final boss once, you can replay several times, beat them again, and they will give you more information about the other three bosses and why they were doing what they were doing. So you can kind of unlock the lore just by playing through the final boss a few more times, which I did do, and I thought the answers made sense, and I kind of enjoyed doing anyways. So I said I would come back to the deck building. When something has a deck building element, that has to be balanced really carefully, because if done wrong, it can put me off a game completely. My biggest issue with deck builders, as a general rule, is, well, the actual deck building. Here's the thing about me and card games, just broadly speaking. I actually really like card games. I love trying to figure out the best thing to do with what I have. Looking at the hand that I have, like, what are my best options? What might my opponent have? What can I do to get the best result out of what I've got? I like making those choices. What I don't like is deciding what goes in my deck in the first place, because it often feels like, unless you are the kind of player who is prepared to do ultra optimization with a spreadsheet and or look up a bunch of tips on how other people who have optimized it with a spreadsheet are doing it, that there is an optimized way to do it and then everything else is some variation of wrong. And when it gets to that level, I feel like this clearly is wanting me to build a deck a very specific way, and if I don't, then I've already lost before this starts. And I hate that feeling. It's what put me off Magic the Gathering, ultimately, was feeling like I didn't enjoy actually putting together a deck enough to have any chance against people who obsessed over deck balance and building everything exactly right. And so I felt like I sat down for games with them, and I've already lost before I started, because the part that interests me is not what they are way better at than I am. But that kind of went on a tangent, because like I said, there's deck building, but it's not like a competitive deck game. Magic the Gathering is not a great comparison, but it just allowed me to illustrate my feelings a little bit. So the deck building in here is pretty well balanced in terms of, there are certain types of cards. There are ones that go directly onto the board, onto the road. There are ones that go adjacent to the road, and there's ones that kind of go out into the wilderness, for lack of a better way to put it. You have a limited number of cards you can put in the deck, but the options for what they are, how many you can have, and you can have fewer than the maximum in terms of cards that you might get over the course of a loop. It's balanced just right that I felt safe to experiment, and also felt that if I'd maybe done something that wasn't the most optimal thing, it wasn't going to prevent me from eventually winning, because it has that sort of rogue legacy sort of thing where even when you lose, you get a little bit of stuff to make you a little bit better down the line. So you'll always be moving towards a victory eventually. It's just a question of whether you get there faster because you're finding ways to win, or whether you're getting there slowly because you're accumulating fewer resources with every loss, but you'll still get there sooner or later if you really commit to it. So the deck building is quite well balanced, and the cards are interesting. There's also 3 different character classes, which play quite differently. So you start out with the warrior, which is just your basic sword, shield, and like you can't control your character in combat. Gets into combat, you can equip them with whatever you have picked up, but what they do in combat is just determined by how you've built them as a character up to this point, between the equipment you've given them and what tiles you've laid on the board that impacts them. You know, how fast are they attacking? How many hit points do they have? How hard do they hit? You don't control the actual in-combat actions, though. So it's largely a game about prep and tactics, and you don't end up feeling like those tactics were made worthless because in the middle of combat you made the wrong decision, because you're not in control of combat. But this is strictly a tactical game, and it never feels like, and because you can basically pause it at any moment and really think about what you want to do. I say at any moment, not mid-combat, but anything other than mid-combat, you can pause at any moment, think about what you want to do next. This really is a game about tactics first and foremost, and not twitch reflexes. So your tactics never feel like they went to waste because you screwed up in the combat somehow, which again feels like a really good balance. The whole looping nature of this is oddly addictive. Well, I say oddly, it's actually, I would say, predictively addictive, in that it hits that just one more go, just one more go, just one more go. It's really easy to lose a lot of time in this, because like most good roguelikes, it makes you want to take one more try, and it hits that quite well. I had a lot of fun with this. It's a really interesting game that aesthetically scratches my nostalgia, and the elements that are at play are balanced just right where there's not so much emphasis on them that it puts me off, because I'm kind of like, I can be fairly varied in what I like, but when something goes too hard on a single thing, I can get bored. But, the balance of the deck building, the overall tactics, just the right amount of luck for, what equipment, or whether you've pulled a card that like you were really hoping to get and you could really use right now, or things like that. It hits it just right where you feel like you have enough control that you want to try again so you can do better, but there's just enough randomness that you also want to go again just to see if you pull better cards this time. So, yeah, it's fun. I enjoyed this a lot. Loop Hero, did you play it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon is what pays the bills. It allows me to be able to not only afford to get these games, but take time in the middle of the day to play them, because I don't have to hold down a day job. This is all part of my job, including the Twitch stuff. So any amount you can help is of great assistance, but even if you can't, like, share, subscribe also help me out. So that's always appreciated, but don't worry too much about it. We take a relaxed attitude around here so you can come on back next time you need a break. All right, time to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Emu Delkey, Leotha Boyd, Toy Loli, Becky Sparks, Phrenobulax, The Poodle, Zach, Bookworm, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperol, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, Shayla Gourlay, Brendan LaRose, and TT. Thank you for your support. If you want to hear me try and say your name while this little guy tries to chew on my earrings, well, you can check out the Patreon for the support tiers that get you a shout out. Thanks so much. You are a pain in my butt.